Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic workshop. This is a real sweet spot in my life, this particular car, for a variety of reasons which I shall explain. But let me first of all present this car. This is a Lamborghini Countach LP400, Periscopio as it was called. LP400, longitudinale posteriore. Longitudinal engine location at the back of the car, which roughly sums it up. 400 being 4 litre. This is where it all started with the Countach, to give it its correct name. This is the original Mark I, if you like, styled by genius Marcello Gandini. So the Miura shocked the world in 1967, 1966, 67. Even Enzo Ferrari was apparently lost for words when he saw it. The Miura was a big sales success. It caught Lamborghini off guard. All this is very much in the public domain. The Countach was, I was 8 years old. It was 1971, and the Countach was announced at the Geneva Motor Show and then the Earl's Court Motor Show in the UK. And I've got a photograph which we can share of the car in that motor show publication, and it just looks like a spacecraft. It looks otherworldly. There's no other way to describe it. Marcello Gandini started with a clean sheet. This was not a development of the Miura. The only aspect that was anywhere near the Miura was the engine, actually. The rest of it, even the transmission, the design of that, completely new. The Countach, if anything, was the opposite to the Miura. It was tail light and nose downforce heavy. And that's part of the reason why the rear spoiler was retrofitted. Even at the factory, it was driven out to the courtyard and fitted there for homologation reasons. The Countach was still a clean sheet design, and it absolutely rocked the world in 1971. It was a shock, just the same as the Miura was those few years earlier. And in 71, the Miura SV had just been announced, the Sprinto Veloce, the then top-of-the-range Miura. It was allegedly a slightly more powerful engine, but it had wider rear haunches to accommodate an update from Pirelli in the tyre world. They went from this sort of design. The Miura SV was fitted with two 5560 VR15 tyres, which in 1971 was cutting-edge technology. The 60 profile tyres seems laughable nowadays, but they were really pushing the boundaries out at the time. So the SV came along. The sales book, the order book, was still very full, even though the Countach had been displayed. In fact, if the factory wasn't in such financial trouble, they could have soldiered on building the Miura for beyond the end of 1972, beginning of 73. They could actually have gone beyond that quite comfortably, selling them. But also, once they'd seen this, there is an element of human nature that says, I want the latest and the best. Problem was, the first Countach, Bob Wallace, the New Zealand test driver, the first that he drove was called an LP400 with a stretched version of the 4-litre engine, and it put the 4-litre engine, the block as it was then, under quite a lot of strain, actually, to the point where it wasn't reliable enough to be used in a production car. So Lamborghini, from that moment onwards for a while, had to persevere with the 4-litre engine, which they copied and pasted almost exactly from the Espada and this Islero. The Miura had different carburation, and the gearbox was cast into the cylinder block. So you could almost take an Espada engine and put it straight in one of these with the transmission layout the way it was. Well, here we have a Quattrovalvole, which is the similar concept engine we just happen to have a part in the workshop at the moment. There's all the pulleys and belts on the front. This is the rear engine mounting that goes above the exhaust system. So the power from the crankshaft comes along here to the clutch, into the gearbox. So as you're sat in the car, the gear lever would be like that, right directly underneath the gear change is right underneath the lever. There's no remote control or cable mechanism. It then jumps down in the gearbox to the other shaft and then comes in along through the sump here, which is sealed from the engine, to the differential going out to the back wheels either side. So this is the front of the engine as it sits in the car. And this was a pretty radical concept, actually. Lamborghini really moved the goalposts once more as to, after the radical Miura design, Paolo Stanzani and Gianpaolo Dallara, this was the next step. And I had the pleasure of meeting Paolo Stanzani at Bob Wallace's funeral, which I went to in Italy with Olivier Nemesh, and that was a great honour to be part of the inner circle of the 3 or 4 people who started these amazing radical pieces of engineering. So yeah, that's how the Countach works. The gear change is right under your hand. If there is any noise, as we know with Harry Metcalf's Countach Quattrovalvole that we did a few years ago for him, if you have any play in the gearbox whatsoever, it makes it very noisy because you're right on top of it. There's nowhere to run with gearbox noise on these, if they have it. This was part of the keeping the weight in the middle idea, and it fantastically works, really. There is then a question mark over how many of these they made. This is a high-profile tyre. This is Michelin XWX's, round about 205, 215, 70 VR14, which was cutting-edge technology again at the time. Nowadays, they're laughably balloon-like, really, but this is the way Marcello Gandini designed it. He also designed these incredible rear wheel arches, absolutely incredible. A shape that just came from nowhere, really. It was such a shock at the time. How on earth could a wheel arch be that shape? People, including myself, thought, but that's the way it was. And nowadays, he was so influential. Lots of vehicles have Marcello Gandini profile wheel arches on them. You pass trucks on the motorway, they have Marcello Gandini wheel arches, coaches, all sorts of things. Because of the engine difficulties and cooling a 5-litre V12, it was many years before a 4.7-litre version of the engine came out in 1982. But it was displayed as a supposedly working car in 1971. Demand was instant, as you can imagine. It was frighteningly expensive, this car. Frighteningly expensive when it was new, but that didn't put people off. If anything, it just added to the mystique. As I say, Gandini designed it with no flared wheel arches, these smooth side profiles. The body is hand-beaten aluminium over a very, very rigid steel space frame. Again, one of the problems with the Miuras was shell flex, particularly in the early cars, first 125. Then Gianpaolo Dallara increased the material thickness on the Miura chassis, and you got a better handling car. But they were stung by that, so get rid of the unibody construction. This is aluminium panels, and all the mechanicals hung on a rigid steel space frame. In 1971, it was shown, and it took 3 years of hard testing to get this car to the point where it was actually sellable as a production car. So they had a sort of hiatus period between the Miura SV and the Countach, which they did not intend to have. They pulled the Miura from production too soon, effectively, but they couldn't have foreseen that it would take 3 years to iron out the bugs. One of the biggest things was the engine and the cooling system, as I say. And the radiators are mounted here, one per side. Like everything else on the car, they were special, bespoke, cutting-edge radiators with a very high heat dissipation ratio, heat transfer ratio from the coolant to the air that's passing through them. They're mounted quite high, but even so, with Gandini's original design, which had a rather brutal vent assembly here, they didn't work efficiently, so they had to add these rather cumbersome looking boxes onto the outside of the shape, which in a way just makes it a little more brutal, but nevertheless, that wasn't intentional. Just to get the radiator sits underneath here, sort of like that height. This particular car is very interesting because they made around about 152 LP400 Countachs like this. 22 of them ish were right-hand drive, and nobody in the world can definitively say how many they made, because this car, for example, this car was sent to South Africa. It was a gentleman there who bought it new. A lot of cars from European car manufacturers in particular were what's called CKD, completely knocked down. And they were built up as cars, then they were taken apart again or assembled together as a load of parts in a big wooden crate, huge wooden crate, which was shipped off to South Africa as an assemblage of parts. And the reason they did that is so they didn't have to pay import duty on a completed car. They received the crate in South Africa, and a team that were trained by the factory but had nothing to do with the factory as such, an independent company, painted them, turned them into a working car. And this happened to 2 Countachs, actually. 2 of them, right-hand drive, were sent to South Africa like that. And this is one of them. As I say, nobody knows for certain because it all gets very confusing with the chassis number listings, and because cars were sold, there was a lot of trickery went on at the factory in the period of the 60s and 70s. If for instance, Mr. Bloggs from South Africa bought his Miura and then 3 years later wanted to update it to the next model of Miura, what he would do is the factory would very kindly restamp the original chassis number on the car, so it looked like it had just been away to the factory for a service and it was the same car coming back. Of course, you know, I'll say no more on that, but that's what happened with several cars. Because the import taxes in South Africa were horrendous, still are actually. It's over 100% you have to pay on top of the already exorbitant car's purchase price to get your Lamborghini Countach or whatever in South Africa. This happened with lots of cars. Jaguar, Mercedes, BMW, all had factories in South Africa. Of course, these were made in tiny numbers, 152 in total of this type. And only, as I say, only 2 of them made it to South Africa. And where they are in the factory records is a big grey area, because most of the right-hand drive Countachs, as Ferrari did, most of the right-hand drive Lamborghinis, for that matter, came via the UK. So the UK was the crucible of right-hand drive exports for Ferrari and Lamborghini and a few other cars. But these bypassed the UK, as far as we can tell, and went straight from the factory to South Africa. This is an extremely rare car. It's owned by this gentleman for over 30 years. It's been sort of under the radar, although it's appeared at a few public things. But one of the things about this car is it is very, very original. This is the original paintwork from 1970. The car was made late 77, early 78. This is original factory paintwork. I believe the colour to be a Lamborghini colour at the time called Giallo Sole, or sun yellow, because it's actually, in some lights it looks yellow, in others it looks like orange. But it might have been the present owner of the car has actually spoken with the previous 3 owners from new, which is great. But nobody can say exactly what the colour is. I think it's Giallo Sole, but it was obviously mixed up in South Africa. Shocking orange, shocking yellow, whatever. The car is not Concours condition. It's not like fresh out of the box. It's aged beautifully, this car. This is a very, very special and unusual car. The Periscopio Countach had very low headroom. I remember driving one of these round another one of the 22 or-ish right-hand drive cars around the Goodwood racing circuit some years ago in the pouring rain with the camera car literally a metre in front of me. And I could hardly see it because the rain was so heavy, and I had a crash helmet on, and I was sat like this driving the car because I couldn't fit in it. They are incredibly tight, these cars. That's why in 1980, they came out with what was called the high body version. So the whole body just went burp by about 50 millimeters to give you more headroom and more room inside. The rear view mirror, the periscope, is here in the roof. One thing that particularly interests me about this car is the grille on the exhaust system on the back, the heat shield grille, because that's painted the identical body color. And having had a word with the owner, they're normally black, satin black or matte black. We think that that's original. We think that that was painted inadvertently body color instead of black from new with the rest of the car. So it's a super interesting car, this. I can't take it for a drive or even start it because the car is just undergoing some recommissioning work at the moment. This is such an interesting car, really. They bought the gauges from a company in the US, very famous company called Stuart Warner. It's amazing how things change, because Stuart Warner actually made munitions in the Second World War to bomb the Italians. They made shells and grenades and very primitive rockets in the US at that time, and of course Lamborghini ended up buying some gauges from them 30 years later. But yeah, this really is a jewel of a car. Yeah, the Lamborghini Countach LP400. What an amazing bit of kit. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Thanks for watching. Please remember to subscribe and like, and we'll be back with something else very soon.